You know, your life's changed quite a bit in the last, what, 6 months?
Well, since about January.
Since about January. What was it? What happened to you?
What happened to me in January?
Yeah. What happened? Why were you asked to leave? And what led up to that?
What led up to being asked to leave?
Mm-hmm.
Probably the biggest thing that led up to being asked to leave was questioning the leadership there, asking questions. And I don't think they were comfortable having anyone asking questions. It would erode their position of authority to be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the last 7-8 years, I've had a lot of questions, things that just didn't make sense. And I expressed those questions not directly to the leadership, because you express it directly to them, you're on the risk immediately of being deemed that you have lost faith or not worthy and being sent out to repent. And I wasn't at a point where I would want that to happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I voiced many of these questions on online forums, on online blogs. And I guess it got their attention. They didn't like that. And I would usually sign most of what I wrote, not with my name, but with an acronym. So I had a pseudonym name that I ran under on those online blogs.
Mm-hmm. And they figured that out?
And they were able to figure out who I was. Unfortunately, they figured it out through means that weren't necessarily legal, in that I'd created an email address with that name for individuals to correspond with, to and from with me anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I was viewed as a threat, or they just wanted to know who this was that was inside of the church within the group, who didn't agree with everything and had a lot of questions, and in some ways probably exposing what they were doing. And so they hacked into that email to figure out who I was.
So they didn't like what they were reading?
Apparently not, because that was grounds to label me as the worst apostate and traitor since the days of Joseph Smith, and ask me to not only not come to any of the meetings or be a part of the group, but to walk away from my family and walk away from the community.
So they didn't like what they were seeing on the blogs from you?
Apparently not.
Well, what kinds of things were you questioning?
Well, starting out, clear back when I probably first started blogging, it was right at the heat of when Warren Jeffs was on the run, and as a people, we're being told how persecuted we are. And I looked at it and I says, well, it seems like most of what we're being told is persecution, we're causing ourselves. I says, why, to use a metaphor, are we sticking our head in the lion's mouth, twisting its tail, and then we're mad when it bites our head? I said, it seems to me that most of the persecution is coming from seeds we've sown ourselves. If we don't like the persecution, why don't we change what we're doing instead of trying to blame it on everybody else, the wicked world, the mob spirit, whatever it is, government that just wants to shut us down? It seemed to me pretty easy to change most of the persecution. And so I voiced that online. I said, why as a people should we feel persecuted when the persecution is merely a reaction to the actions that we're taking?
So words like wicked and the mob, what kinds of words do they use inside the church to kind of group the outside world into one little, one bad entity? What kinds of words are used in those meetings?
I wouldn't say the entire outside world is grouped as a bad entity, but the outside world is something that has not received the higher blessings of the Lord. And so it's believed that eventually, since we're taught the truth, we're taught the only way to get back to God, eventually we will go out and convert all those who will be converted to the Lord's way. Those that are not willing to, of course, will be destroyed, wiped off the earth. Now there is what's referred to as Gentiles. Those are individuals who've never been part of the group.
What am I?
You would be considered a Gentile.
A wicked Gentile?
No. You're just a Gentile. You're someone who's never been a part of the group. You may be classified as a wicked Gentile if they knew you were a news reporter. News reporters have a pretty low level within the opinion of most people, because they feel like the news reporters come in, report, and not necessarily favorably, have their own agenda, and cast the people in a light that most feel is very inaccurate, and it causes problems, and and they feel persecution from the outside world. And so they would rather, I don't know if they necessarily call you wicked, but they would classify you as annoying. They would rather you not come around. They would be totally happy to live their life out in Colorado City or wherever their community is without any outside influence. It's outside influence that can be a concern. Anything that comes from outside of the group has the potential, because you haven't been taught the truth, to sow seeds of evil or wrongdoing or things like that.
So maybe I'm misinformed, maybe I'm, misled, or, I mean...
As far as why you would be classified as Gentile or wicked?
Or wicked.
I don't even know if they'd say you're misinformed or misled. You've just never been told the truth.
Well, you've been called wicked. Now you're the
Okay,
wickedest man.
I'm considered the wickedest because I've been given so much, and now I say, I don't necessarily agree with all of this. So as soon as you've been given, and then you say, I don't agree 100% with everything I've been told, okay, you're a traitor now, and anything and everything you say is of the devil. As soon as you turn away from the organization in any way, you're not 100% for them, they want to marginalize you. They want to, in the minds of everyone else, in order to maintain their position over the group, they want to say, that person is evil, they're apostate. Apostate is a very emotionally charged word. If you're an apostate, you're the worst of the worst. You're someone who knew the truth, you've walked away from the truth. Obviously, you've walked onto the devil's ground, the devil owns you. You don't even have the ability to tell the truth anymore. And so once you're labeled as apostate, now if the worst of the worst apostates, okay, I guess that's a special category. And I was told I was the worst of the worst, the worst traitor. And the reason I think they said I was the worst traitor was right near the end, I put up online a list of questions that they were asking each one of the elders.
Tell me those questions.
Well, I don't know the questions right off the top of my head.
What kinds of questions were they? What was so bad about them?
There's nothing really bad about the questions. If you look at the questions themselves, they're fairly innate questions. It's things like, is the love and peace of God growing within the family? Are you living according to the laws you've been given? There were some of them which dealt a little bit more, are you living according to, I'm not even sure how it's phrased, but are your marital relationships in accordance with the guidelines we've been given? Some of those things. Now, if to just read the list, you'd say, okay, what's wrong with that? But if you'd been in the meetings and known what it is that those questions really mean, it's not really a code, but they're trying to look into the aspect of the way you live, how you live, your very thoughts, and every one of your actions. Not just your actions when you're outside of the house, but your actions inside of the house, how you work with your family, how you work with each other, how you work with your children, and how husbands and wives interact with each other. And my opinion was, this is getting a little bit too invasive on these questions, especially how my relationship is with my wife. That's between myself, my wife, and nobody else. If God wants to watch, he can watch, but I don't think he needs somebody else watching besides him.
So things were changing in the last year. How were they changing?
I don't know that it's just the last year. It's been a progression. Within the last year, I think what's really pushed hard is the fact that Warren is now into Texas. Texas has custody of him. Since the raid, they've been very concerned because when the authorities came in, they raided Texas, they took from the temple archives all of the priesthood records. Now, for good or bad, Warren kept very detailed notes of everything he did. Unfortunately, everything he did isn't what the image of Warren that was portrayed to the people happens to be. They know that, as meaning the leadership, they're very concerned about that. Many times within priesthood meeting, it was stressed very, very explicitly, you do not look at all at any of these priesthood records. Don't look at them at all. You look at them, you'll automatically turn traitor, be an apostate, and lose your faith, lose your priesthood. If you lose priesthood, naturally, you cannot have your family or be part of the group. And they said in the priesthood meetings, you've got to be very careful of looking at any of these. They've been stolen by the wicked apostates, by the mobocrats is the word they use. The mob referring to anyone who's trying to tear down the work of God. And you've got to look back a little bit in history when you say mob. Back in early Mormon history, the mob, it literally was a mob in the early days. The people were driven from Nauvoo, from Jackson County, different areas back in Joseph Smith's day. And after Joseph Smith was killed, they were driven and under Brigham Young moved out to Utah. Now the reason they were driven, that's up for each person to decide as far as history. When you review it, you can make your own decision. But there was an influence, and according to the people faithful to the Mormon creed at that time, it was a persecution of driving, and it wasn't pleasant, it's sometimes very brutal. And so you read that history, you're taught that history growing up in the FLDS. So when you're told the mob is coming against us, it's very emotionally charged. And so you say, you know, anybody, if they're classified as the mob, that's somebody to be feared. You want to stay away from that.
That was good to that point, but let's just wait for it.
Okay.
Claire.
So, so in other words, I guess getting back to what we were talking about.
Well, we were back at
we were talking about how
the
things
temple
have changed.
records, right?
When did you first start seeing things change from when you were growing up? I mean, when you were growing up, it sounds like things were pretty nice. I mean, things were more open. How did things change when Warren Jeffs got in?
I don't know if things were more open, but I think it's a combination of not only did things change a little bit through the administration of Roland Jeffs and into Warren Jeffs, I changed as a person. And so I think it's a combination of my perspective of how I viewed things and of changes within the religion itself. Growing up, the religion is very much about family values. The community really was one big happy family in so many ways, at least from my perspective at that time. Now, there were definitely rifts within the community. There had been a split within the leadership when I was very young, and another group split off from the FLDS, started their own group. And, you know, I sensed some of that friction, but the thing is, we still, to a degree, associated with those people. We didn't at first totally just shun them or say they were really horrible. And one thing within my father's house, which was different than some, he never criticized anyone. He considered them to be good people. And I thank him to this day for that type of attitude, that even though they do not necessarily follow the prophet that we considered to be God's chosen man on earth, he still considered them very good men. And so, you know, I'm very thankful to have had that growing up, that kind of a level-headed response to you know, basically religious turf battles is really what it amounted to. Growing up through high school, things became, you know, a little more restricted. When I went into high school, up to that point, marriages they were arranged marriages. But a lot of times, if a boy and a girl went and asked for each other, quite often the prophet who put the marriages together, married them, would agree to that and say, okay, yes, I'll marry you. Or if they'd gone out and been together, done things together which were considered wrong, he would send them away from the community for a year, repent, bring them back, and they would be married. Now, usually that was only for time. They're only sealed for time. They couldn't be sealed for time and eternity because the prophet hadn't put them together initially.
Are you sealed for time and eternity?
I'm sealed for time and eternity because the prophet made the decision of who I was going to marry. I didn't ask for my wife. She didn't ask for me. Although we're very happy with each other. We've known each other since first grade. He did a good job. But starting about ninth grade, it became a little more restrictive. Roland Jeffs at that time said, you know, you cannot go out and pick your own wife. I'm drawing the line. That's something that the prophet does. No more choosing your own wife. So it's a little more consolidation of power. But I was fine with that. I mean, the prophet talks to God. He's God's representative on earth. Why wouldn't that be right? So I really didn't have that many questions over it. I got married. He married us. I was fine with that. That was great. Loved my wife, still do. So there really weren't a lot of questions clear up in the first couple of years of marriage. This is coming up. I was married in '97. In 98, Roland Jeffs had a stroke, which in so many ways made it so he had very limited ability to express himself or communicate. Right around that same time, he had two counselors. One of them was Parley Harker, the other one, Fred M. Jessup. We call him Uncle Fred, Uncle Parley. Great man, I really have a lot of love and respect for him. And Parley Harker died. So now that leaves a position open. Roland Jeffs appointed his son, Warren, to fill that position of first counselor. Warren had been very close to his father for years because he was principal of the Alta Academy up in Salt Lake City, where his father lived. And so he had a connection and was very close to his father and did a lot of the research and putting together sermons and ideas for his father. His father, being Roland Jeffs, relied on Warren to do a lot of his work for him, figuring things out, putting sermons together, pulling resources together for teaching the people. Warren is an excellent teacher. I don't care what anyone says, he is a very good teacher, excellent at it. Researcher, he's very good at that. Charismatic, he is a very charismatic person. And so it seemed natural, seeing he was so close to his father, to be put into that position. Well, he moved down from Salt Lake to live next to his father and become Okay. Right, well, Warren Jeffs moved down from Salt Lake, and they built a house for him right next to his father's house. He became what they termed the mouthpiece for the prophet. He spoke for the prophet. He was one with the prophet's one with God, so anything Warren says is what the prophet said, which is what God said. So it gave him tremendous ability and not really control initially over anybody, but he became the one who did all the talking in the meetings for his father, and he took the interviews. At that time we were asked to, as elders, an elder being any man over the age of 18 that had been ordained into the Melchizedek priesthood, that's the higher priesthood. You have to be an elder to be married, is asked to once a month come and check in with the prophet, tell him what you're doing, how things are going. If you got any questions, ask him. And you know, those used to be fairly informal visits. I mean, we went to the house, it was usually one-on-one. And you know, if we had any question religious-wise, family-wise, anything like that, we could ask it and receive an answer, and I enjoyed those. And after Roland's stroke, he didn't have the ability to do that anymore. So Warren, because he speaks for his father, took over doing the interviews. So it was just natural. This progressed up until 2002, and we were told that Roland Jeffs would be renewed.
What does that mean?
Renewed means, okay, he's had the stroke, he's been reduced in health greatly. I mean, there were many times he'd go to the hospital, and amazingly, when everyone, even the doctor, says he's going to die, he didn't. And so, you know, that was a great faith builder for the people. He keeps bouncing back. Obviously, the Lord's taking care of him. You know, this is just a test on the people to make sure they stay faithful to the prophet through the sickness. But apparently, it was told to us by Warren that his father had had a revelation where he was going to live another 300-something years, I think it was, into the millennium and lead the people into the millennium. And so that was stressed nearly every Sunday. And that revelation, I bought into it. I was sure, that's great. He's going to be renewed. I mean, we've seen times when his health got very bad and he came back again. Well, 2002 he died, like any mortal person dies. And I think that's really the start of when my faith was really rocked in the religion. I said, well, how can this be? He was promised to live for 300 more years, that he would be renewed. Well, the day that he died, the people were assembled in church when he died. And I remember the elder that got up to say the final prayer after the people had been told that our prophet had passed on, he got up and he said, Lord, now we understand how you're going to renew the prophet. And I remember sitting there thinking, no, he didn't renew him, he just died. That's not renewal, that's death. But that's typical, is that you'll take an event, a revelation, if it doesn't pan out exactly how it's supposed to happen, twist it, spin it a little bit, and fit it into the new reality. Because they're always taking an image and trying to put it into reality. If it doesn't quite fit, okay, well, we'll have to move it around a little bit until we get it into that reality.
And that's when Warren stepped in?
And that's, well, initially Warren didn't step in. He said Father is still in charge. Father's just in the other room. I am just here to do my Father's will, which is what he'd said for the last 5 years. I'm here to do my Father's will. Because, okay, he's the spokesman for the prophet.
Mm-hmm.
He's his right-hand man. He's the first counselor. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
He's here to do the will of his Father. And usually before his father died in church, his father would be sitting on the stand. Warren would present. He'd talk. And a lot of times afterwards, Rulon would say, Warren has spoken exactly what I wanted said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not he understood what Warren had just said or not, I don't know. There were times when Rulon would talk a little bit longer and contradict many of the things Warren said, and Warren would have to get back up and say, well, here's what Father really meant to say. You know, some of that was a little bit of a, this seems odd or strange to me, but things like that were easy to ignore, to set aside. We were told, you know, if you've got questions, put them on the shelf. You don't want to compromise your faith over a few little questions that you don't understand. Just take that question, put it in a little box, ignore it, set it on the shelf, pray about it. Eventually you'll get an answer. If you don't get an answer immediately, just ignore it.
What happened to your shelf?
Well, my shelf got stacked so high it broke, and I couldn't put everything back on it. And so everything spilled out on the floor. I began examining everything. And that all started when Rulon Jeffs died.
Well, how did it get progressively more controlling under Warren?
Well, Rulon died at near the end of 2002. Going into 2003, then under Warren now, he said, you know, all the celebrations we've got, those are a distraction. Those really, we don't need those. He shut down everything as far as the events that we had. We had one more 4th of July celebration, one more 24th of July celebration. 4th of July was a big event every year. You know, I mean, this is a not Pioneer Day, but Independence Day. That was something we all looked forward to. 24th of July was just as big. That's Pioneer Day. Big parades, you know, get-togethers. We'd all gather at the meeting house at 7 in the morning. We'd have a flag raising, the cannon salute, sing patriotic songs. You know, it was just great. It was just this big feeling of community.
And then Warren
Everybody
took that
gets
away.
together. He took that away. It wasn't necessarily sanctioned of him. It wasn't pointed towards him. He didn't want the distraction. Also, in 2003, there was an event where some of the higher up men, some of the men who'd been in the community for years, helped build the communities, the Barlows, and a few others, had built a monument in the little Pioneer Park there in the community to Leroy Johnson, the prophet who had brought the people through the raid on Short Creek, which had happened in 1953. Authorities came in, took all the people, the women and children away. So they built a monument to him, big marble monument commemorating him. Apparently they didn't check in with Warren on this, and he was very upset. And so he got up in church right after that happened and really said the Lord is very displeased with the people. Erecting monuments, he likened it to the people of the children of Israel when Moses went up on the mountain making the golden calf. We hadn't checked in with Warren. We'd erected a golden calf, so to say, and he told the people, he says, you are to take that, smash it to pieces, grind it to pieces, and spread the pieces out in the hills. Just like Moses had ground up the golden calf and made the people eat it. He didn't make the people eat it, but go scatter the pieces in the mountains. He says, and since the Lord is so displeased, he says, all priesthood blessings are removed right now. So that means there's no more meetings, no more baptisms, no more marriages. And that continued on for probably 5 or 6 months. The meetings didn't come back, but the marriages did. But when I was married, that was a big event. I mean, half the community came to my marriage. It was great. I mean, we weren't really trying to hide anything. Everybody's there. Everybody knows who's marrying the other person. In fact, most of the community knew who I was marrying before I found out. Rulon just forgot to tell me. So it was just a big community event. Under Warren, half the time the parents weren't even there. Or if they were, it wasn't the whole family. It was just
Start with under Warren.
Under Warren, right. The the family, if any family was there, there may be the father. Often the father was there, sometimes the mother. And that was about the limit of it. It wasn't held at the prophet's house or at the house of the man or the woman or his father. A lot of times these marriages were held in little motels, say in Mesquite or Caliente, Nevada, somewhere else, not within Utah, Arizona. Arizona had made laws against underage marriages at that time, so they're trying to get around those laws. But the secrecy, the extreme secrecy on all this, that bothered me. The fact that when Rulon died, that went against his prophecy, if it came from Rulon, that he was going to live that many years into the future.
That bothered you?
That really bothered me. And then when Warren would get up and say, well, I'm just speaking for Father. Okay, well that's what he's done for years. Father's just in the other room. Okay, but pretty soon it was, okay, Warren is now the one man on earth who holds the keys of heaven. That's what they referred to the priesthood, the keys, the ability to seal people on earth in marriage and your blessings, and it's sealed in heaven. According to our teachings, that only one man on the earth at a time can have that, which is the prophet.
So you got, so Warren comes in, he says no more celebrations.
Right.
He changes the way people are married.
Mm-hmm.
He takes his father's wives, right?
He did. Now, initially, I didn't know about that.
But these are all things, kind of give me a list here of how that progression went.
Well,
So you can say, so
Well,
that I have something in like 20 seconds here.
mm-hmm.
You know, just give me an idea of what did Warren do, and what was it that was going on in your head? If you can give me just a list
Okay.
there.
Well, it's right off. The Monday after his father passed away, one day after, Warren gets up in our Monday morning meeting. And he says, I want all elders of Israel to know, hands off my father's wives. Now that seemed really strange to me. I said, why would anybody be worried about Rulon's wives? Why would he even say a thing like that?
But he took his father's wives,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, well, I didn't know that at the time. That seems strange. Okay, he became very inaccessible as far as being able to have appointments with him seen. You know, come to find out later, it's because he was traveling all over the U.S. finding new spots to build up little enclaves of his chosen people. He shut down all the meetings. That seemed very strange. But the other thing that was very odd to me that didn't jive with any of the history or the way things had been done before is that he had never, that we knew of, been ordained to any kind of an apostleship position, which is required to be the prophet. Now, several months after his father passed away, his younger brother and several of his father's wives were called on in meeting to explain how, unbeknownst to Warren, his father had told them that Warren was going to be the next prophet and that he had been ordained and set aside. And then it progressed from there to where the Lord himself came and ordained Warren as the prophet.
Did this seem orchestrated?
Well, it was a bit orchestrated, of course. And I could tell that, and it seemed very strange. I said, you know, this just doesn't jive with anything I've ever been told. And how can, if there's only one man on the earth at a time who holds the keys of priesthood, how can Warren claim that he's got them and say that his father's just in the other room and has them? Now that's two men on earth. Well, okay, is Rulon Jeffs dead? Well, you said that he was renewed, so he's still on the earth. So Warren, you can't be the key holder. It's still your father, right? It never played out. That was never explained. That was just one of those things I said, this is very strange. And so at that point, I said, I want to get to the bottom of this. I can't have a testimony that Warren is my connection to God. And so I started doing some research about it. And the more I researched, on back, what I come to the conclusion of is that overall, a lot of the history that I was living under and been told my whole life was what I'd term a revisionist's history. Things were manipulated around to portray a certain image to the people. They weren't always told everything that happened. Big pieces were often left out or misrepresented or changed. I said, no, that's very strange. If this is the Lord's work, why would that be necessary? Why would we want to do that? There was that, and then the actions that Warren began taking didn't sit right with me. Just the fact that the girls were getting married very young, I didn't like that. A lot of the men were going into hiding because they were being pursued by the law.
You didn't like that either?
I didn't like that, but that's when I said, well, hey, if you guys don't want the law beating on your doors, it's easy to change. Don't marry the girl seeing. And that was one of the questions, one of the main ones that I kept going back to. I said, you know, and they never could show me. And they still haven't. I said, show me within the scriptures, within any holy writ, anything like that. I said, show me where it says that a girl of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is any more pure or worthy than one that's older.
Or even 12 years old.
Or 12. Well, back then I didn't know about any of those. I mean, that floored me when I found those, when I realized and was made aware of some of those. But just knowing even 15, 16, 17-year-olds being married, why can't we wait till they're 21, 22? In my heart, I knew. But I had to ask that question, and no one could give me a satisfactory answer on it. You know, why can't we wait till they're a little bit older? We're causing persecution to come upon us by marrying these girls very young. That would be easy to avoid if we just waited a few years.
And no one ever told you?
Well, they
Why?
didn't. There's not an answer why.
Do you think they knew?
Oh, I think some of them knew. I mean, as a young age, they're much easier to control than as you get older. Your view, your perspective on life changes. You become much more independent. You don't want someone to become independent-minded. They're very hard to control once they do.
You're independent-minded.
I am probably an independent mind. They don't want independent minds within the organization.
Do you think that's why they asked you to leave?
Among other reasons, I'm sure that is.
Let's talk about that day.
Okay.
Then, I mean, do you want some water?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So you're called in, and you're expected to do something that's completely unbelievable to me.
Okay, it's a two-part process here, and I really haven't explained how it all works. Initially, when my email was hacked into, I realized it. I tried to log into my email, couldn't get into it, and so I went in through a back door, through another email account, realized someone else is in there, had their IP addresses on my email, so I took a snapshot of that, and this is Friday afternoon, priesthood meetings on Sunday. And so I figured, you know, something's up, because I'd looked at the browse history of who had been in my email, what they'd looked at. Mm-hmm. They'd looked at all my chats, mm-hmm. all my contacts, all received emails, and all sent emails. Now, why would anyone do that? It's not a spammer. They didn't send anything from my email. So whoever had gone into my email just wanted to find out who I was. Now, this was an email set up under my acronym. There are only two places in the entire 4 years of history of that email that I know of that had my name anywhere in it, but it did have my name. And so when I walked into priesthood meeting 2 days later, I was somewhat prepared. I figured, you know, someone is looking to find out who I am. And sure enough, I walked in and they said, Lyle Jeffs is the lead man out there. He's the bishop and what's considered the first elder. So he's in control. He's the one in charge. They said, Lyle wants to see you immediately. Okay. And I had a pretty idea what he wanted to see me for.
Were you nervous?
Not really. And so they took me up front. They're up front in the meeting house on the north side, and I waited for a minute. And Lyle came out with two other men, Bill Shapley and John Wayman, and they said, you know, come in the side room with us. And Lyle presented me with a stack of papers, probably an inch and a half thick. Right on the top of the paper is the acronym that I ran under on my email, that I had corresponded anonymously with other members and non-members who had questions, along with several blog sites listed that I had posted, you know, my thoughts and ideas and questions on. He said, is this you? I said, yes, that's my acronym. And he said, okay, I want you to read this. And he hands me the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. And he asked me to read the section on betraying the brethren. And so I read it, and he says, so in light of this, what do you think should be done? I says, well, I'm not the judge. I'm not the one that makes those decisions. What do you think should be done? And I don't know, he probably wasn't expecting an answer like that, because he stood there for me and he says, well, I'm not here to judge anyone either. Let's start with probation. I want you to come and check in with me in a month, but in the meantime, just don't come to any of the meetings. I can't have you at any of the meetings because you're questioning what the prophet is wanting done. And so I agreed to that. I mean, what else really could I do? Mm-hmm. And I left. I wish I would have taken the papers, or at least looked through the stack of papers to know exactly everything he had printed out. All I saw was the top copy. But it was my email address, the acronym I ran under, and I'd posted on 3 different blogs. He had those 3 blogs listed on this cover sheet. Mm-hmm. a couple of weeks later, when I'm gone to work, I usually am out of town and in Las Vegas on Wednesdays. That's just a day you can almost always count that I'll be out of town. My wife's father called up my wife and said, are you home? She says, yes. Is Arnold at home? No, he's gone to work. Well, he shows up and says, I need to talk to you, meaning my wife. And so they go outside. He says, not by the children. And he explained to my wife, he said, you know, your husband has been running a website which is just absolutely trashing the people, ripping down the prophet. He has exposed all the church secrets, which I found very interesting, because I don't know of any church secrets I've exposed. I wasn't privy to a lot of the actual very inner workings of the church. I didn't run a website, but it's interesting, all these things. And he says, you know, he's the worst traitor and apostate since the days of Joseph. And if you want any chance of salvation, you know, staying within the community, being a part of things, you've got to make your decision now whether or not you're going to leave your husband and stick with the priesthood and come under the control and direction of the priesthood.
And this is your wife's father. So
this is my wife's father, correct.
Psychological,
yes,
emotional way to do this.
It is.
That's,
well,
was she conflicted, do you think?
Well, I'm sure she was. I mean, that's very difficult to have your father, someone you love and respect, come and do that to you. She was prepared, though, because I told her that that is most likely what they would do.
So what did she decide?
Well, she said, I'm not going to. She said, I love my husband. He's a good man. He's the best husband I could possibly have. I'm not going to leave him. I'm not walking away from him.
That's wonderful. That's very good. How do you say that again? Now? Oh, okay. I can see him.
Yeah.
You couldn't see him.
I don't have my glasses on.
It's a great park for birds. A little while ago, there was a hummingbird just hovering
Was there
right over
really?
your shoulder.
It's your angel.
There you go. My guardian angel. I never knew what it looked like. Thanks to Jim, we found it. Yeah.
So what did your wife tell her dad?
Well, I don't know word for word because I wasn't there, but when she told me about it, she said I just had to tell him my decision is to stay with my husband. He's a good husband, a good father. And so she was reminded again, well, you've got to make your decision. And he left. Before he left, he said, do not tell your husband about this conversation. Well, when I got home, of course she did. I mean, she was pretty emotional by the time I got home. I mean, that's very traumatic to have something like that come and happen.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so she told me everything that happened, and this is late at night. This is 11 o'clock at night when I got home. So the next morning, 6:30, 7 o'clock, I called my father-in-law and says, we need to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Where can I meet you? And he said, come over to my house. And he came out and jumped in the truck with me, and we talked for half an hour, 45 minutes. But I told him, I says, it sounds like I'm getting credit for a lot of things I have not done. He says, well, you admitted that, you did all that stuff. And I says, I don't know what I'm admitting to. I says, all I admitted to was that was my acronym, and those were some websites that I've gone on. I says, that's all I've admitted to.
Mm-hmm.
I would like that again.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a different question here. At that point, did you feel like you were the most wicked man since Joseph Smith?
No,
You didn't believe it?
no, no.
Um, yeah, that's a big one. It's going to be okay, though. We're doing all right.
No, it'll come well. It's just the big ones I don't.
Gives us a 45-second break, huh?
Yeah. So at that,
It's not terrible. You do see a little bit of motion in the background. Soft
we're being followed. Not really.
Yeah.
So at that point, did you feel you were the wickedest man on earth since Joseph Smith, as your father-in-law said?
No, no. What have I done that's such a traitor? I've asked questions. Why is asking questions wrong? And that's one of the things that I couldn't understand is that the whole Mormon religion started out as being a question. Joseph Smith didn't know which religion to follow. And he read in James, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. So he went out into the grove and prayed. That's the story we've been told. And the Lord spoke to him. And that's how it started, is being inquired of. And we were taught as children, the Lord loves to be inquired of. Now, if the Lord loves to be inquired of, I would think that he wouldn't mind you asking a question if you don't understand something. But it got to where we were not to question at all. We were supposed to have 100% obedience. Don't question. If you question, you're being unfaithful. You have the potential to lose your priesthood, your family, and be sent away from the community if you question.
Which is what happened to you.
Which is, well, that's what happened to me. That's what's happened to countless others. For whatever reason, the leadership decided they were not worthy to stay there. Were they a threat to the leadership in some way? Possibly. Had some of them committed actions which weren't right, had been harmful to their families? Undoubtedly, there were some of those. But overall, most of the men pushed out, it was to refine and consolidate the power within the leadership. If you were viewed as a threat, as not 100% obedient, you were exiled from the community, sent away from your family. Now you can imagine the emotional pressure that puts on an individual to do just about anything to come back into the community and be back with their family. A few men have. Not very many, but a few have. And so that puts tremendous psychological pressure. Also, which is amazing, is how many men, when Warren did his first major expulsion in 2004, I think there were 23, 24 men followed and did what he said. They walked away from their families. And you know, people look at that and they'll say, why? Why would a man leave his family, walk away from his family? Well, at that time, I don't think, and I've talked to some of these men, they had no idea what Warren was going to do. They thought it was remove from our family for a week or two, humble ourselves, pray about it, come back in for an interview, at the longest 3 months, and then we'll be reunited with our family. Okay, maybe we, you know, we're not perfect. I don't think, as long as we're alive, I don't think we're perfect. There's no way to be perfect as long as we're living, in my opinion. So we've all got our little demons we're dealing with in our lives. So everyone, you know, you could point out to anybody and say, you know, you've got some sins. Well, of course you do. It's impossible to be perfect. That's not what life's about. It's about trying to achieve a better position than you're at currently. And so I can see where a lot of these men would say, yes, I've got some faults. It did seem a little bit extreme to many of them to leave their families, but they had no idea that Warren was intending on exiling them for the rest of their life, taking their families, assigning them to other men. But once he'd started that precedent, it stuck. Very few people stood up against it and said, no, this is wrong. This isn't what we've been taught before. This isn't how things ought to be. And so it started a precedent where if you were at odds at all with the prophet, if you questioned what he was doing, you could be sent away. And very few men, if any, really stood up against that or said, no, I'm sticking with my family. And so, you know, the further it went, the more it became somewhat normalized within the minds of the people. And I know a lot of folks say, well, why would anybody do that still? Even after they saw what he did initially to the men, not letting them back. Why would any man agree? Why would any wife agree to leave her husband? Well, the belief is so strong within the church that God and the prophet always do right. If it comes through the prophet, it's what God wants. That is your ticket. Your salvation is dependent upon that.
So they believe when Warren tells them to leave their families and they reassign this family to another man, that it's actually God speaking through Warren.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that most of the time it's very firmly believed, and even some of the men believe, well, if I don't have priesthood, I don't have the ability to save my family. They feel that they're making that sacrifice so that their family still has the potential to be saved. If the family stays with a man who doesn't have priesthood, they can't be saved. That's the belief. That's how they view things. It's their view of the world. And so it's very, very difficult to say, you know, I'm not walking away from my family. I'm staying here. I don't want, you know, I don't want to follow what I've been told. I want to stay with my family, because you'll be compromising the salvation of all of your children. That's what we're taught. That's the belief, and it's that view. Basically, the religion, it's not really totally a guide for how to live. It's everything about living, and in fact, it's gotten so to the point recently, as far as the level of control, how dependent the people are upon the religion, to where they will get up in church. This came directly from Lyle Jeffs. He got up in church shortly before I was asked out, and he said, "I want you people to know," he says, "you're not to have a personal identity of your own. You're not supposed to look, act, or even think what isn't organized, orchestrated, or given to you by the priesthood over you."
Let's say that again. That's really important. I mean, tell me that again. You right before you were kicked out, Lyle Jeffs made a pretty damning statement.
It was what I already knew, but I couldn't believe that he would actually say it point blank within church, that he got up, and I've got it. Let's hold off for a minute.
That's a loud one too.
Well, it's going to start in just a second, so
Yeah,
let's
it
just wait
is.
till it leaves.
We can see him.
I'm blocked by the statue fountain.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to take this opportunity to change this guy over at the end of it.
If you've got it, watch it. If you don't, call your TV provider to get HDNet today. If you've got it, watch it. If you don't, call your TV provider to get HDNet today.